Every parent knows just how stressful those first few moments of a child's birth are, anxiously waiting to hear your newborn cry for the first time. But for some, that wave of instant relief doesn't come, and suddenly they're thrust into every parent's worst nightmare, something that our next guest, Dad Elliot Ray, experienced. Oh. That's from a new BBC documentary, Becoming Dad, and Elliot joins us now. Elliot, really lovely to have you here. And I could see even in there, 6 years on, Eleni's now 6, the emotion is still there for you. We often talk about the woman in that situation because clearly your wife was, you know, giving birth. What was happening? What were you taking in? How was it feeling for you? Yeah,
it was a difficult moment, you know. As you said at the beginning, you expect that moment for your baby to come out and cry, and it ought to be joyous. But that didn't happen. She was lifeless. She had to be resuscitated. Doctors were getting fluid out of her airways just getting fluid out of her airways. And then my wife was also losing a lot of blood as well. And it's a real moment, you know, in my adult life, feeling helpless, numb, and just looking on and just hoping that it'll be okay.
Was the situation quite sort of, where there was suddenly a lot of doctors and a lot of people and confusion almost in there with you?
Yes, there was 7 or 8 doctors around my daughter and the same around my wife as well. And they're just having conversations about what they can do. And
I suppose at that point they're not thinking about how you might hear stuff because they're just into saving life, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, it was kind of like an out-of-body experience because you don't expect it at all. Like, I thought it was going to be all good and it would be fine. So completely taken by surprise and just watching things like it's not your life.
Must have felt so helpless.
And just felt helpless. And looking at it like I'm looking at it like a CCTV camera and just seeing it all happening in front of me. So, yeah, really, really difficult moment. And then they said, you know, do you want to go to ICU or do you want to stay with your wife? And I said, you know, I'll go with my daughter. And we went through this corridor. I remember in the hospital going through this corridor and just wanted to phone my mum because not knowing what to do.
Of course.
They didn't have any reception in that part of the hospital, so I couldn't. And then getting to the ICU and this nurse looking at me and saying, look, you need to come back with us. You need to be present.
Of course, because when you left the operating theatre, you were hearing things like, she's bleeding out, your daughter wasn't breathing, and so it must have been like a...
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even imagine how awful... Do you feel that you were losing it a bit then at that point when you were in the ICU?
I felt like I wasn't there. You know, like it was a kind of complete disconnect to what was happening, like a dream. And it wasn't until I got to the ICU and the nurse looked at me in the eye and said very assertively, you need to come back, you know, you need to be present. And that was good for me, actually, because it kind of brought me back and realised that I'm literally a dad now and I need to be present for my family. And then they took us into this side room and I met other parents as well. So there were other parents at the beginning of an ICU morning. You can kind of gather and then you go and have a private consultation.
Yeah.
So those parents, they were amazing because they were like, look, this is how you need to be. You need to be an advocate for your daughter. You need to look at what medication they're having. You need to be on top of things. Of course, it's emotive, but you still have to do your best to try and help, you know? And then I kind of, from there, realised that, yeah, my role is as a dad and I need to look after my daughter, make sure she's getting the best care. And so for the 2 weeks after, it was kind of that mode that I was in.
Because that speed of being thrusted into trauma, you know, like you said, eventually you sort of realise, OK, this is what I'm doing, I'm being her voice. But to be thrusted into trauma like that is incredibly stressful and difficult.
Yeah, it was.
You know? And it's not when you go to all these NCT classes, that's not the journey you're sold as a new parent.
I mean, Elliot, I mean, thankfully, you know, after a time, your wife is well, your daughter is well, but at what point did you realise that you hadn't really processed this and this was really still dragging you down?
Yeah, so we spent 2 weeks in hospital and then because in the UK we only get 2 weeks of paternity leave, which, you know, we are campaigning to get more. So it was a few days off and back to work into quite a busy job, full-time role. And for us, both of us, me and my wife, very paranoid. We were going to A&E most weeks. We were at A&E just worried about any little health scare. And struggling to process and understand and accept what had happened. And just difficult moments, you know, finding it difficult to sleep. Flashbacks of what had happened going through my mind. Becoming anxious. I was never an anxious person before. You know, going to work and struggling to say hello in the morning to my team or struggling to input into a meeting when I had actually some important stuff to say, finding it difficult to speak. And so those kind of things just let me know this was something that was with me and I couldn't really budge. And it just kind of built. And then what happens is you worry about being worried. You know, you worry about what's going on. Why am I not sleeping? Why can't I be my normal self? Why am I not the normal, confident person that I am?
But you were given a sort of formal diagnosis of PTSD, weren't you?
Eventually, yeah, kind of by accident, actually. So 18 months afterwards, by this time I'd started writing about my just being a dad. And I spoke to someone who was doing some stuff around mental health, perinatal mental health. And they talked to me about the birth. And that was the first time someone had really spoken to me and asked me the deep questions. And I kind of broke down explaining to her what had happened. And she recommended I speak to someone. And then I eventually did speak to a specialist, a birth trauma specialist. And she gave me the diagnosis and I had some conversations with her. But for the first 18 months, I just kind of got on with it. I didn't think it was something that happened to men.
Do you feel like that was a conversation that was probably mostly had with your wife as, you know, as the woman, they're the one that are pregnant, they give birth? I often feel like the men in the situation get left behind. You know, no one asks you, are you okay? How are you coping with it? And like you said, you knew you had to be strong, which obviously you did in that moment, but also maybe that, you know, having to stay strong, it was a trauma for you as well,
definitely.
and for so many other men.
Yeah, so my daughter was born in 2015. So throughout 2016, at that point, it's changed now, gladly, in some NHS trusts, but at the time, there wasn't any regular assessments for dads who'd been through any traumatic birth or whose partners were experiencing mental health conditions. There was nothing like that. So it wasn't forthcoming, but at the same time, I didn't think I could seek it either. So at no point did I ever think, oh, this is something I should seek professional help for. It didn't cross my mind at all.
When you got the diagnosis, it's clarity, OK, this is what's going on. But post-traumatic stress disorder, it's not like you just get a cure and then you go on your way. You know, how are you now? Because triggers can pull you back, sounds, smells. It's not always a consistent recovery.
No, I'm good now. I mean, it was 6 years ago now. I have had the support. And I think doing what I do now, it is kind of like my way of therapy, I guess.
I get that.
You know, working with other dads.
Purpose.
And purpose.
Yeah.
So now I kind of, even though it was a devastating experience, I do believe it was part of my life's journey.
Yeah.
And part of what I was here to do and the reason why I'm doing the work I do now. So.
Well, I have huge respect for you, what you're doing. I really admire how you've coped and how you're helping other people. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And your forum is called Music, Football, Fatherhood, yeah?
That's right, yeah.
And people can find you online and you've got all sorts of kind of activities and support and conversations going on.
So we're all about open conversations about being a dad. And we try to create those open environments, you know, where dads can come and share their stories, meet other like-minded people. We do that for our podcast, for our online meetups. We do events with football clubs. We've got a book called Dad we've published. It's called Dad, Untold Stories of Fatherhood, Love, Mental Health and Masculinity. And I'm so proud of the book. It's so powerful. It's 20 dads that have come together from different backgrounds, different races, sexualities, all across the UK. And they're sharing their stories, some really devastating stories, but what brings them together is that they're being vulnerable and being open. And I think what we've heard from dads is that it lets them know when they read it, they're not alone. There's someone else that's been through their experience, you know, and that is so powerful just to know there's someone else that's been through what you've been through.
Well, listen, it's brilliant for us too to get your perspective. So thank you so much, Elliot, for coming in and telling us all about it. And of course, the documentary is out there for people to see as well. For anyone who might be struggling or wants more information, there are lots of helpline details on our website and info on our Stand By Your Men campaign to encourage men to talk.